August 15th, President Nixon told the nation he had frozen wages and prices for 90 days. He proposed new tax reductions for business. Cope Report for October 1971 examines Nixon's new economic policies in a special report for trade union officials.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong.
The immediate public reaction to the president's proposals was largely favorable, but that reaction shifted after the AFL-CIO Executive Council unanimously adopted a statement pointing out the inequities in the president's proposals. I.W. Abel, president of the Steelworkers and a member of the Executive Council, analyzes the initial public reaction.
There is no doubt that the general and immediate reaction to the president's freeze order was very favorable because there was a widespread desire for our government to do something about inflation. The executive order freezing wages, prices, and rents seemed to be the something that many people had been looking for. But when the executive order was totally digested, and when the fine print and implications became fully known, the unfairness of the order became obvious.
Machinist President Floyd Smith doesn't believe the Nixon administration claims that workers are causing inflation.
The fact is that the working people, the wage earners who man the factories, who mine the coal, who transport the goods, who keep the wheels of industry and commerce turning, have been widely and unjustly blamed for many of the ills that afflict the economy. For a long time, the propaganda experts have been blaming inflation on the wages of the working people. For a long time, anti-labor voices from the boardrooms of big business have been saying that America's deficit in world trade is due to the fact that the wages of the workforce have priced America's goods out of the world's market. The purpose of this propaganda is, of course, to convince the American people, including working people themselves, that labor is getting too much.
Mr. Smith has facts to back up his position.
But if we look at the facts, if we compare the average factory worker's income with the amount the government itself says a family of four needs to maintain a bare minimum standard of health and decency, we see that the workers who produce the nation's wealth are not getting too much. It may surprise many people who keep hearing all this propaganda about high wages to know that last year the average factory worker in America earned less than $6,800. And that was almost $1,000 less than he needed to enjoy what the government describes as a minimum standard of health and decency. These figures, which are published by the government itself, prove that the people who produce America's wealth are not getting too much. In fact, they prove quite the opposite.
Officials of the Nixon administration claim they had the power to outlaw strikes. Mr. Smith presents the trade unionist's view.
By freezing wages, the president also nullified one of the precious rights of a free people, and that is, of course, the right to strike. I realize that many people do not like strikes because they do not understand the role that strikes play in our system of free collective bargaining. Just as collective bargaining is essential to free enterprise, strikes are necessary to collective bargaining. One of the key differences between democracy and communism is that in a democracy, workers have a right to strike, and under communism, they do not. In the entire history of the American people, no president has ever before ordered every strike to be stopped, no matter what the issues or how just the cause.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong.
The AFL-CIO Executive Council called President Nixon's program unfair, unjust, inequitable, and unworkable. The council said the program was weighted in favor of big business. Mr. Abel explains.
Is the business of this country really business? Is there some unwritten law which says that industry has priority over people? I would hope the business of this country is people, and that the economy should operate to benefit all the people, not just the managers of industrial and financial America. The workers have been shortchanged enough, and organized labor is saying enough. We say to the president, if you want controls, make them fair. Make them apply to Wall Street speculators, to money lenders, to coupon clippers. Don't sock it to the little guy. He's had enough. We say to the president, you have called for sacrifices to make your plan work. Fine. Then let everyone sacrifice. We say to the Congress of the United States, it is now up to you. to inject equity and fairness into the latest presidential game plan. Eliminate the tax bonanzas for big business. Instead of the tax bonanzas, give us real tax reforms. Make the controls apply across the board. And let's start meeting the unmet needs of America.
We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll.
To find out more
we're gonna
details
roll,
about the
we're
Nixon
gonna
program,
roll.
Cope Report talked with Nat Goldfinger, organized labor's top economist. First, we ask him if President Nixon's new economic policies will lead to economic recovery.
The president's proposals will not lead to economic recovery, and they don't add up to economic recovery, because part of the president's proposals involve the loss of jobs, wiping out 100,000 or more federal government jobs, cutting federal government expenditures, postponing aid to the cities and the states, and postponing the welfare program. All of these things mean the loss of jobs. Whatever additional employment is provided in some of the president's proposals is more than wiped out by these job losses and job elimination parts of the program.
Is his economic package equitable for everyone, including big business and workers? Mr. Goldfinger.
The economic package that the president is trying to put over on the American people is grossly inequitable. It is loaded in favor of big business and the rich. It is loaded against the average wage and salary earner and the low and middle income people in general. It is one of the major big business attempts of American history to shift the income distribution of this country into the hands of the rich and the big corporations. As you undoubtedly know, it involves a tax bonanza to the corporations in the form of an investment credit in new equipment and new machinery, 10% in the first year and 5% for every year thereafter. This adds up to about $27 billion over 10 years. This comes on top of another administration action, and that is a speed up of depreciation write-offs, which adds up to $37 billion in 10 years. And then there are several other goodies that the president has proposed, all of which total up to about $70 billion to the corporations in a period of 10 years. Now, someone has to pick up the tab on this kind of huge tax reduction for the corporations, and obviously this means the average wage and salary earner. The administration's tax proposals represent an attempt to shift about $70 billion of public money out of the hands of the low and middle income people into the hands of the corporations and the major stockholders, and that's only a part of it.
Mr. Goldfinger, what is going to happen to wage increases due workers during the 90-day freeze?
The companies obviously are going to pocket that money, the money that is due the workers, which they will not have to pay them during the 90-day freeze under the president's order. The price structure is already set in terms of the companies paying those deferred wage increases. The amount of money here runs into the hundreds of millions and undoubtedly billions of dollars. The total amount is unknown. But you take the entire package and the impact on corporate profits of the deferred wage increases that will not be paid during the 90-day period. You have the tax proposals of the president, including the depreciation write-off, and you have a massive shift of income distribution if these proposals are adopted in their entirety.
If President Nixon had frozen all incomes, including profits, interest rates, dividends, as well as workers' wages and salaries, would the AFL-CIO have cooperated with a wage price freeze? Mr. Goldfinger.
Certainly, if President Nixon had frozen all incomes, wages and salaries, plus dividends, and acted on interest rates, on profits, and on all incomes, not simply on wages and salaries, he would have had the support of the AFL-CIO. He would have had the cooperation of the AFL-CIO if he had followed up such a freeze immediately by calling in the trade union leadership and management to set up some kind of workable mechanism for eliminating the inequities that are obviously inherent in any freeze. However, what the president did was to slap on a freeze, but only on wages and salaries. He did not include profits. He did not include dividends. He did nothing at all about interest rates and bank profits. In addition to all of those things, he permitted the inherent inequities in a freeze situation of this sort to go on for weeks and months without any kind of real give on the wage side. Many parts of the price structure are left completely unfrozen, and other parts at least partly unfrozen, so that you have an effective freeze on wages enforced by the employer who signs the paycheck. But on the other hand, you have only a partial freeze on prices with no freeze at all on such very important items as fresh foods, fresh fruits, vegetables, and fresh meats.
If the boss is in the way, we're gonna roll it over him. We're gonna roll it over him. We're gonna roll it over him. And if the boss is in the way, we're gonna roll it over him. We're gonna roll the union on.
Andrew J. B. Miller is the AFL-CIO's legislative director. We asked Mr. B. Miller if Congress should heed President Nixon's request for speedy action on his tax proposals.
It is our opinion that Congress should proceed rather deliberately in evaluating the president's tax package. Any program involving $70 billion in a giveaway to the large corporations of this country should not be acted upon with haste.
Mr. B. Miller, what is Labor's position on the president's tax proposals?
We are absolutely opposed to the investment tax credit proposal which the president has brought forth. This would give to the big corporations of this country a huge sum of money for doing absolutely nothing. Most heads of large corporations have already said that even if they get the investment tax credit, they will not add any employees. The effect of it would simply be a gift of several $billion. And when you add that on to the revamping of the depreciation schedules of large corporations, what President Nixon would do is to give about $70 billion over the next 10 years to the corporations of this country. That seems to us to be a ridiculous proposal. The president is also planning to establish a new kind of giveaway to corporations. He is proposing that all exporters should not have any taxes assessed against them for their export trade. As far as doing away with the excise tax on automobiles, we are in agreement. We have long argued that there should be no federal sales taxes, and that's all that the so-called excise tax on autos is. We also certainly don't object to advancing the program of some relief for low and middle income taxpayers, which is in the president's program in a very minute manner.
Mr. B. Miller told Cope Report about Labor's alternatives to the Nixon proposals.
There should be decreases in taxation for lower and middle income groups in the population, but that the money lost in this manner to the federal treasury should be made up by closing tax loopholes. There are many glaring tax loopholes by which wealthy people in this country either completely or almost entirely escape taxation. The biggest loophole of all is the question of capital gains, money made by speculation on the stock market or in land. At the present time, these capital gains are taxed at only 50% of the regular tax that you and I pay. If this loophole were closed, we could pick up $10 to $12 billion for the federal treasury. And what we think should be done is to close not only this great big loophole, but a lot of others, and use that money for public investment, for building the schools and the hospitals and the health centers that we need so desperately in this country, for really instituting a war against pollution of all kinds, water and air alike. In other words, what this country really needs is to use the public's money for the public good and not for the welfare of large corporations.
We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the union on. If the boss
Cope Report continues on side 2 of this cassette with more information about the wage price freeze. Side 2 is designed to be played at local union meetings.
We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll. We're gonna roll the union on. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
The AFL-CIO pledge to cooperate with mandatory controls was based on the absolute essential of fairness, equity, and justice. None of these is contained in the President's wage price freeze.
This is COPE Report for October 1971. This month, the wage price freeze, a report for union members on how it will affect you.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
On August 15th, President Nixon radically changed his economic policies. He instituted a 90-day wage price freeze and proposed major changes in the tax laws. 4 days later, the AFL-CIO Executive Council held a special meeting to consider these new economic policies. At a major press conference, AFL-CIO President Meany read the council's analysis of the wage price freeze.
All workers' wages are frozen for 90 days. During that period, all cost of living adjustments are prohibited. Seniority, longevity, and merit increases due workers are barred. Productivity increases are nullified. However, not all prices are frozen. There are exemptions and loopholes through which prices may be increased. Eggs, fruits, and vegetables, which every housewife must buy for her family, are exempt from the freeze. The 10% border tax on imports will be passed on to the consumer. New products and new housing, for which no price is now set, will not be effectively controlled.
There is no effective enforcement of the price freeze.
With no machinery for enforcement of a price freeze, the consumer is at the mercy of corporate pricing systems and unscrupulous businessmen. Wages, on the other hand, are effectively frozen because the individual employer has complete control over paychecks. The burden of the freeze falls on workers with highly visible collective bargaining agreements.
While wages are frozen, the profits made by business are certain to increase.
Prices are at record levels and will surely continue to rise while wages have been frozen at a real earnings level below 1968. Workers have been bearing the burden of both inflation and recession for 2.5 years, and now they are being forced to bear the additional burden of a freeze. The effect of the President's freeze is to nullify every collective bargaining agreement in private industry which provides a wage or salary adjustment during the 90-day period. Of course, employers will thus pocket additional profits for their prices already reflect wage increases that are due, but which the President says cannot be paid.
Mr. Nixon proposed a new tax break for business. Lane Kirkland, Secretary-Treasurer of the AFL-CIO, examined the details of this tax proposal.
The proposed 10% so-called job development tax credit is another loophole to permit rich corporations to avoid $4 billion a year in taxes. Corporations would get the tax break even if they invested in machines that eliminate jobs. So calling this a job development measure is simply deceitful. At a time when industry is only operating at 73% of capacity, what is needed is more customers, not more industrial capacity.
Mr. Kirkland explained the small tax cut proposed for the average taxpayer.
The President also proposed to accelerate exemptions for the average taxpayer. This, he says, will result in added consumer spending. In reality, it would only mean about $1 a week for an average family of 4, and that wouldn't start until 1972, while the President proposes to give business its tax break retroactively to August 15th, 1971.
Oh, the union is the place for me, the place for working men who want some time to sing and play and money they can spend on...
In a nationwide radio address, Mr. Meany told his audience what effect the President's tax proposals would have.
In effect, the President proposes a grossly unfair and one-sided redistribution of the public wealth. For those who have much, the President proposes more. For those who have little, the President proposes less. What America needs is tax justice, and this proposal is certainly not just. America needs to close tax loopholes, especially in the areas of capital gains, depreciation, depletion allowances, tax-exempt bonds, and the like. America still has far too many millionaires who pay no taxes at all.
I'm standing on the picket line 'cause I want a living wage. We'll stick together through the wind and the weather. We'll get that living wage on the line.
Mr. Kirkland pointed out the importance of workers' wages to a healthy, growing economy.
The worker spends his earnings in his own community. He uses the money to pay his bills and to buy the things he needs. The worker, as a consumer, makes the most efficient use of his money. When he can buy the goods he produces, then jobs are created. Retail establishments sell more goods. Industry makes more products. Increased volume improves efficiency and increases productivity, and the entire economy benefits.
What will be the effect of the freeze on workers' paychecks, Mr. Kirkland?
Hundreds of thousands of workers are covered under contracts which provide cost of living adjustments, productivity, seniority, and merit increases, all during this 90-day period. One union alone, the railway clerks, has a deferred wage increase totaling $305,000 a day for 190,000 workers due October 1st. That is more than $13 million during the freeze period that now becomes additional profit to the railroad companies. And this story is repeated in thousands of labor management agreements across the country. As a result of the president's freeze, these wage increases will go to the companies and not to the workers who earn them. This is not only unfair, it is highway robbery.
Economic policies that are fair and balanced are what America needs to solve her economic problems. Mr. Kirkland explains.
What we need in this country, and the AFL-CIO has been saying this for a very long time, is a general resolve on the part of those who hold the political and economic power to bring equity and stability to the economy without putting all the burden on the worker or on any other single group of citizens. Fairness and equity must be at the root of any policy that is imposed on the economy by the government. We in the AFL-CIO are going to insist on that.
On the line, on the picket line, we'll win our fight for the right on the picket line.
President Nixon's new economic policies followed 2.5 years of mismanagement of the economy. Particularly hard hit by his previous economic game plan were the cities and states. President Meany told radio listeners,
For 2.5 years, high interest rates and high welfare costs have been swallowing up local and state tax revenues. For 2.5 years, state and local governments have been unable to move on badly needed housing, hospital, and school projects. Public services are falling apart. Teachers are joining unemployment lines while classrooms are overcrowded. Police and fire and sanitation departments are undermanned, under-equipped, and underpaid. For 2.5 years, Mr. Nixon has been saying that America cannot afford these things, and Mr. Nixon has been wrong. What America cannot afford is to ignore them any longer. What America cannot afford is to siphon off more public funds for private gain. America cannot afford a $70 billion tax windfall for big business. The needs of her people are too great and too urgent.
At his press conference, Mr. Meany said,
We in the AFL-CIO take no satisfaction in the fact that we have warned the Nixon administration throughout its term in office that its actions were going to achieve the kind of economic mess the nation is in today. The record will show that we repeatedly and publicly suggested programs and policies to the administration that would have curbed inflation and achieved full employment. The president ignored them or refused to adopt them. We have absolutely no faith in the ability of President Nixon to successfully manage the economy of this nation for the benefit of the majority of its citizens.
what will the AFL-CIO do to make certain that economic policies will benefit the entire nation? This is what the Executive Council said.
Specifically, we urge the Congress to reject the president's proposals to further enrich the corporations at the expense of the poor and needy and the public treasury. We will fight to block his discriminatory attack on jobs and the wages of federal employees. We will insist that controls on prices and wages be made equitable, and that all other forms of income, profits, interest rates, executive compensation, expense accounts, the prices of stocks and bonds be brought under equal restraints.
What actions does the Executive Council recommend for individual unions? President Meany reads the Council suggestions.
We have never recommended and do not now recommend defiance of lawful orders. We do suggest and recommend to our affiliates that where, as the result of the President's action, contractual provisions are impaired and members suffer losses, that those contracts have been nullified by the President of the United States. Such contracts should be subject to renegotiation at the first opportunity.
The Nixon administration also claimed the power to halt all strikes during the 90-day period. This was the Executive Council reaction.
We flatly reject the administration's contention that it has any such power. In peacetime, this is an assertion of dictatorial powers completely foreign to the American concept of freedom. Even in wartime, no other president asserted such a right. We will not abide by any such dictate, and we will advise our members to resist any such attempt.
When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. For no force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one, but the union makes us strong.
This has been Cope Report for October 1971. Speaking to the United Transportation Union Convention, AFL-CIO President George Meany left the delegates with a final thought as to what union members can do to ensure fair treatment from the government.
Perhaps this fight will carry over to 1972. President Nixon said several times, 71 is going to be a good year, 72 is going to be a better year. Well, maybe 72 will be a better year, but not for him. Because in 72 we have an election, and American workers still have the right to use their influence, to use their voting power. They still have a right to join one with another in order to play a part in national elections. And the AFL-CIO is ready to play that part. And we're ready to play that part in the interests of the workers of America, and the final analysis, anything that's good for America must be good for the workers of America. That's our principle.
For the union makes us strong.